Richard Rorty, 1931 to 2007, was an influential American philosopher best known for his contributions to pragmatism, philosophy of language, and political philosophy. His 1989 book, Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity, stands as one of his seminal works, synthesizing his ideas on language, selfhood, and politics. It challenges traditional notions of objective truth and foundational philosophy by advocating a form of pragmatism rooted in contingency, irony, and a liberal sense of solidarity. Overview of Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity. The book is organized around three central themes, each corresponding to one of the title's terms: contingency, irony, and solidarity. Rorty's core argument is that our vocabularies, our linguistic frameworks and concepts, are contingent products of history and culture, not reflections of some universal or objective reality. This contingency calls for a new approach to philosophy and politics, one that embraces irony and solidarity rather than metaphysical or epistemological certainty. Contingency. At the heart of Rorty's philosophy is the contingency of language, self, and knowledge. He argues that all knowledge and identity are contingent, meaning they depend on historical, cultural, and linguistic circumstances rather than on timeless, necessary foundations. Contingency of language. Rorty critiques the traditional philosophical project of seeking a fixed, mirror-like language that corresponds to reality. Instead, he holds that our vocabularies are social constructs shaped by contingent historical circumstances. Language does not represent reality objective but serves pragmatic purposes within specific communities. Contingency of selfhood. Rorty rejects the notion of an essential fixed self, or soul. Our identities are not rooted in an unchanging human nature, but are narratives we create through language and culture. The self is a work in progress, continually redescribed by the vocabularies we adopt. Contingency of knowledge. Knowledge is not the discovery of eternal truths, but a product of human vocabularies and conversations. There are no universal foundations for knowledge, only practices that prove useful in specific contexts. This stance is a rejection of epistemological foundationalism, the idea that knowledge must be grounded in indubitable foundations. Instead, Rorty embraces a pragmatist epistemology where justification is a matter of social agreement and utility rather than correspondence with an objective reality. Irony. The second theme, irony, builds upon the contingency of language and selfhood. Rorty introduces the figure of the liberal Ironist, a person who recognizes the contingency of their own vocabulary and self, understands that their beliefs and desires are not grounded in objective reality, but are contingent and revisable, does not regard their own vocabulary as privileged or final. For Rorty, irony is a mode of self-awareness and intellectual humility. The Ironist is aware that the vocabulary they use to define themselves in the world is contingent and could have been otherwise. This leads to a stance of openness and flexibility, where one is willing to revise or abandon cherished beliefs when faced with better alternatives. Importantly, irony is not cynicism or nihilism. It is not a rejection of all beliefs or values, but rather a recognition of their contingency and a refusal to claim absolute authority for them. The liberal Ironist remains committed to moral and political ideals, but understands that these ideals are contingent and revisable rather than absolute. Solidarity. The third theme is solidarity, which Rorty sees as the foundation for a progressive liberal politics. Solidarity is the feeling of identification and empathy with other human beings, despite differences in culture, language, or background. Unlike traditional political theories that rely on universal, objective foundations, such as natural rights or justice, Rorty argues that solidarity is a contingent, historically produced sense of connection with others. Solidarity emerges when we expand our circle of empathy beyond our immediate groups, recognizing others as fellow sufferers and fellow seekers of a better life. The task of liberal politics is to cultivate and extend this sense of solidarity by expanding the vocabularies through which we understand others and ourselves. Rorty rejects the idea that political progress depends on discovering universal moral truths. Instead, he believes that social progress comes from increasing solidarity through democratic conversation and imaginative enlargement of our vocabularies. Philosophical context and influences. Rorty's work draws heavily from American pragmatism, especially the ideas of John Dewey, William James and Charles Sanders Peirce, who emphasize the practical and fallible nature of knowledge. Like Dewey, Rorty emphasizes democracy as a social practice of conversation and persuasion, rather than the application of fixed principles. Influenced by Ludwig Wittgenstein and Wilfrid Sellars, Rorty rejects the idea of language as a mirror of nature, embracing instead a view of language as a tool for coping with the world. Rorty also engages with continental philosophy, notably with thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, who emphasize the historicity and contingency of discourses and identities. Critique of traditional philosophy, contingency, irony, and solidarity is also a critique of traditional philosophy, especially the search for objective foundations in epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. Rorty rejects the mirror of nature model of language, which assumes that knowledge is about representing reality accurately. He criticizes the philosophical quest for certainty and foundational justification as a futile effort that leads to intellectual dead ends. Instead of trying to ground knowledge or ethics on unchanging foundations, philosophy should focus on expanding vocabularies, fostering dialogue, and promoting social solidarity. Political and ethical implications. Rorty's pragmatism leads to a novel conception of liberalism in politics. Political progress is not the discovery of universal rights or justice, but the growth of solidarity, the widening of empathy, and the inclusion of previously marginalized groups. Liberalism is an Ironist project, one that is always open to revision and self-critique. Democracy is a practice of conversation and persuasion aimed at enlarging our sense of community. Rorty's liberalism is anti-essentialist and anti-foundationalist. It does not rely on metaphysical or moral absolutes, but on a pragmatic commitment to reduce suffering and enhance human flourishing through democratic deliberation. Reception and criticism. Contingency, irony, and solidarity has been highly influential in contemporary philosophy, especially in debates about postmodernism, pragmatism, and liberalism. Supporters praise Rorty for offering a hopeful, practical vision of philosophy and politics grounded in language, contingency, and empathy. Critics argue that Rorty's rejection of objective truth leads to relativism and undermines the possibility of rational criticism or moral obligation. Some worry that his liberal Ironist stance, by emphasizing contingency and irony, risks political passivity or a lack of commitment to stable values. Despite criticisms, Rorty's work remains a vital intervention that challenges entrenched assumptions and encourages a flexible, humane approach to philosophy and politics. Conclusion. Richard Rorty's Contingency, Irony, and Solidarity offers a profound rethinking of philosophy and politics centered on the contingency of language and identity, the self-aware humility of irony, and the ethical and political ideal of solidarity. By rejecting foundationalism and embracing pragmatism, Rorty presents a vision of liberal democracy as a conversation aimed at expanding our empathy and inclusion rather than discovering timeless truths. His work continues to inspire debates about the nature of knowledge, selfhood, and political community in a pluralistic and historically contingent world.